worthiness issues are genetic. So, for those who don't know me, I'm Kim and I help female entrepreneurs struggling with perfectionism to overcome their self worth issues in 21 days so that they can scale their businesses and create the success that they want in their lives. So, let's get into it. One of the things I really like to do with my clients in our sessions is to dialogue with the person that hurt them. A lot of the time when we have these messages internalized about ourselves, they usually come from someone during our formative years. Somebody treated us a certain way, they said something to us, they did something, and that made us feel a certain way because we created a meaning out of that event. We couldn't see that maybe that person has their perspective from things that happened to them before, or maybe they were having a bad day. You don't understand that when you're a child and it happens, and we internalize it and make it about ourselves. So I always get them to dialogue with that person that hurt them and be like, okay, like, what was going on? Why did you do that? Like, why did you react in that way? And most of the time it's pretty unanimous. Most of the time the person that did that, they've done it because that was what was done to them, or because they basically didn't know better. Like, they couldn't think of a better way of being. Like, they did it with intentions of, because they thought that's what was right. And it's interesting because it's like they're usually doing it from a place of like they don't know better. This isn't the case for everyone, obviously. Sometimes people do know that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. But generally speaking, it's because those people were treated that way themselves. And so that's why they have that unhealed wound within themselves. And they're passing it on to someone else because they haven't done the work on themselves to examine that. And so then they just end up passing it on. And then that person passes it on. And then it just builds up generationally. Would I say it's genetic? Maybe not necessarily in your DNA, but it definitely is like a culturally passed on thing. And when I say culturally, I mean that like culturally is behavior that we embody that isn't genetic. So it's like the way that we are in our culture, whether that's like the culture of our family, the culture of our community around us, the culture of like our country or our ethnicity. We're like, oh, that's how we do things, that's how we see things, but that's not necessarily passed on genetically, but it's very much an attitude towards how you do things that is passed on through the people that you're around. So it keeps getting passed on until you decide that you're going to do something about it, and that you're not going to pass this on to either your children or the people around you. You are going to deal with this issue right now and not keep passing it on to people after you. So while we can understand why our caretakers may not have set us up for the best example of self-worth, either because they didn't have high self-worth so they couldn't model something to you that they don't know how to do, it's not excusing people for what they've done, but it gives us understanding and compassion, and it allows us to see it through the lens of, it's like, it's not actually that something that's wrong with me, it's like they don't know how to do better, so they were doing the best that they could with what they had at the time and the resources they had available to them, which is what everyone is doing, even if it's not like the quote-unquote right thing to do. People usually are doing the best they think that they can do in that moment in time. So it allows us to have a little bit of compassion and grace for those people, especially if they've hurt us, which is like the first step towards healing. Like, you can't really heal a situation if you are still holding on to that anger and hurt from like how that person has treated you in the past. And so it's really interesting because there was research done that basically states if you haven't experienced something in your formative years, you're not really going to have a concept or comprehension of that thing later on in life, which is really interesting. And some of the research I was reading was talking about how they took kittens and they put like these collars on them so the kittens couldn't see their own bodies. They could just like see what was in front of them, and they put like these two sets of kittens into two different environments, one where they only could see vertical lines, and the other one they could only see horizontal lines. And so when they eventually like had these kittens grow older, the kittens who had been respectively looking at whichever lines they were looking at, they didn't have a concept for the other lines because they'd never been exposed to them. It was something completely new. And I know this sounds really far out there, but there's also an African tribe, and I can't remember if it's blue or green, but for like, let's just say it's blue, they have like 30 different words for it. And for green, they don't have a word for it, like they don't have a concept for it. So when you show them images of green, they don't have a word for it. They just call it another shade of blue. And this really shows you how, like, unless you're exposed to something from a young age, you don't have a concept for that, and you don't have a way of thinking about it in your brain when you're older. Also, there's people who are like legally blind, and when they have like a surgery to reverse it, and they technically can see, they still can't see because they don't have concepts for all the things that they're seeing. So it's really interesting, and just shows you how, like, unless you have a concept and comprehension of something, then you're not going to be able to figure that out later down the line, or you're not maybe going to be able to, I never want to limit someone and be like, you're not going to be able to figure it out, but it's like you're going to have to do some work to figure out this concept and to like model it and embody it. And it's the same with worthiness. Like, if you grow up in an environment where you have always had really low self-worth, and people around you weren't modeling high self-worth, it's going to feel really weird to step into a version of yourself where you realize that you are worthy and deserving, and like you are enough, because you don't have those concepts fully formed. But the amazing things about humans is that we have neuroplasticity, which just means that like you can basically reprogram your brain. So you can reprogram yourself to have high self-worth. And one of the easiest ways that you can start doing this right now is just changing the way you speak to yourself. Like, so many of us, we are so critical, we are so harsh to ourselves, we're always putting ourselves down. You're always telling yourself like you could do better, you could be doing something else, like why aren't you doing it like this? Oh, this person is better than you. And that really destroys your self-esteem. Like, it really, like, we're always feeding back into our environment what we believe about ourselves, or what we believe about anything. And so when you're really telling your mind, like, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, everyone else is better than me, your mind is just going to be showing you more and more evidence of that. So the way that you can really start to turn this around is like on a daily basis, like just like meeting yourself in the mirror and start telling yourself like all the things that you wish that you heard growing up. Be like, you're amazing, I'm so lucky to have you in my life, like I'm so proud of you, like the effort that you put into this is amazing, like you're doing a great job. And yeah, it's probably going to feel weird at first, because if you're not used to that, it's like I was saying before, you don't have a concept for it. It feels totally unfamiliar to you, feels totally weird. And the thing is, though, is as humans, we are hardwired to seek out what is familiar to us and to avoid the unfamiliar. And this is why so many of us end up stuck in the same patterns, because we're not willing to make ourselves a little bit uncomfortable and go into that space of feeling doing something that feels unfamiliar to us, because your mind perceives it as a threat. It thinks that you doing something different is risky, because who knows what might happen, where it's easier to stay in what you know, even if that's not actually making you happy, because at least you know you're like, you survived it. So when you want to start changing your self-worth, you're going to have to do some things that feel a little bit weird to you at first. And even if the only thing that you start out with is just start telling yourself, like, I am enough, I am good enough, like, just keep repeating this message to yourself over and over again, because your brain really learns from repetition. So you've spent a whole lifetime building yourself up to this point, being like critical of yourself and not saying the things that are going to empower you to go out there and do the things you need to do. So it's time to like switch it around. And it might feel weird at first, or you might forget, or it might take a little bit of practice. And like, no one is perfect. We're not aiming to be perfect in this, we're just aiming to be better than we were before. So that's like one simple thing that you can do to change that for yourself today. So just to recap, basically, most of us, we learn our behavior about having low self-worth from like the behavior that was modeled to us when we were growing up. Maybe we didn't have an example of someone showing up and demonstrating high self-worth. Maybe like our primary caretaker wasn't in their worthiness, so they were just passing that on to us. But we can really be the ones to start changing this and healing this today. And one of the best ways to start doing it is change how you speak to yourself, and change the messages that you are giving to yourself, and doing this on a consistent basis, and just watch how everything gets to change for you. So if this is something that you're struggling with and you want to overcome it, you can book in a free strategy call with me. We can chat about how I can help you change this in just 21 days in one session. I would love to help you with this, because when you change your worthiness, everything changes. So I hope you have an incredible day, and I will